The Velhari Grand Assembly Station was not a place built for the weak. It floated in deep space like a crown made of cold metal, massive and proud, with towers that stretched toward the stars and halls so wide that 100 beings could walk side by side and still not touch. Dozens of alien species moved through its corridors every day. Diplomats, soldiers, traders, and council members. Everyone who came here came with a purpose. Everyone believed they had a right to be here. Zyra believed that too. She stood outside the great chamber doors and breathed slowly. Her hands were steady. She had practiced keeping them steady for years. Her skin was a pale silver color, lighter than most Velhari, and her eyes were a deep amber that caught the light in a way that made some people stare. She was not tall for her kind, but she carried herself like someone who had learned that posture was the only armor that no one could take away. She wore her petition badge on the front of her coat. It was a small flat piece of polished metal with her name and lineage etched into it. She had earned the right to wear it by passing 3 written examinations and 2 physical assessments over the course of 8 months. She had done all of that quietly, on her own, without help from anyone. She had not told anyone what she was trying to do. She had not wanted anyone to try and talk her out of it. The doors opened, and she walked in. The chamber was enormous. Rows of curved seats rose up on both sides like the inside of a shell, and every seat was filled. Council members sat at the long table at the front, 7 of them in dark formal robes, their faces still and unreadable. High Elder Dorvan sat at the center. He was an old Velhari male, narrow-faced, with white markings along his jaw that indicated his bloodline had never once been touched by any other race. He looked at Zyra the way someone might look at a stain they had not noticed before. She stepped forward to the floor marker and stood straight. The petition reader announced her name and her purpose. She was requesting formal entry into the Galactic Defense Fleet evaluation process. She had met every listed requirement. She had the documentation. She had the scores. She had the badge. Dorvan looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. He said her name as if it tasted wrong in his mouth. He asked her to confirm her lineage. She confirmed it. Her mother had been full Velhari. Her father had been from a smaller outer world species with no council seat and no standing in Velhari records. That was the part that mattered to them. That was the part that had always mattered to them. Dorvan spoke to the other council members without looking at her. He said her petition did not meet the spirit of the evaluation requirements, even if it technically met the written ones. He said the fleet needed candidates of pure focus and clear origin. He said the evaluation process was designed for individuals who could represent the Velhari people without complication. She asked what complication he was referring to. He looked at her then. He said her existence was the complication. The chamber was quiet after that. Not the kind of quiet that meant people were shocked. The kind of quiet that meant they already knew this was coming and were simply waiting for it to finish. Some of the council members looked at the table. Some of the delegates in the gallery looked away. 1 or 2 whispered to each other behind their hands. Nobody stood up. Nobody said anything. Dorvan called for a procedural vote. It lasted less than 30 seconds. The petition was denied. He did not call it a rejection. He called it a determination of ineligibility. As if the word made it cleaner. A station official walked to Zyra and held out his hand. She understood what he wanted. She unpinned the petition badge from her coat and placed it in his palm. She did not throw it. She did not say anything. She turned and walked toward the doors, and the doors opened ahead of her, and she walked through them, and they closed behind her. The corridor outside was long and pale and empty. The light came from strips along the ceiling, and it was a cold white light that made everything look flat. She walked until she reached a section of wall where a support beam jutted out and created a shallow alcove. She stopped there. She put her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor with her knees up and her arms resting on them. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of that a long time ago. But she sat there and she stared at the far wall, and she felt the weight of what had just happened settle into her chest like something heavy being set down for good. 8 months. 3 examinations. 2 physical assessments. Every requirement met. And it had taken them less than 4 minutes to throw it all away because of who her father was. She had known this might happen. She had told herself she was prepared for it. But knowing something might happen and then having it happen in front of hundreds of watching eyes while no one said a single word in your defense were two very different things. The second one left a mark that the first one did not prepare you for. She heard footsteps in the corridor. She did not look up. Most people who passed through this section were on their way somewhere and paid no attention to anything that was not their destination. She expected these footsteps to do the same. They stopped. She looked up. A human stood a few feet away from her. He was not especially tall, but he was solidly built, with short dark hair and a plain expression that was not uncomfortable to look at. He wore a human military uniform, standard security detail designation, with a station access badge clipped to his collar. He was not looking at her with pity. He was not looking at her with curiosity. He was just looking at her the way someone looks when they stop because stopping seemed like the right thing to do. He said nothing for a moment. Then he asked if she was all right. She almost said yes. She had spent so long saying yes to that question that the word was already forming before she could stop it. But she looked at him, and something about the way he was just standing there, not hovering, not leaning in, just standing there giving her space while also not walking away, made her say something different. She said no. He nodded like that was a fair answer. Then he walked over and sat down on the floor beside her, back against the same wall, a reasonable distance away so she did not feel crowded. He did not ask her to explain. He did not offer advice. He just sat there, and the corridor was quiet, and for the first time since she had walked out of the chamber, the silence did not feel like something pressing down on her. His name was Derek Cole. She did not know that yet. He did not know her name either. They sat in the pale corridor light, and for a little while neither of them said anything at all, and somehow that was the most decent thing anyone had done for her in a very long time. His name was Sergeant Derek Cole, and he had been assigned to the Velhari Grand Assembly Station for 6 weeks now as part of the human military's diplomatic security rotation. It was not glamorous work. Most of his days were corridor sweeps, access checks, and standing in places while important beings talked about things that did not concern him. He was good at it because he was patient, and patience was the one thing the job asked for above everything else. He had not planned to sit down in that corridor. He had been on his way back from a sweep of the outer east wing when he turned the corner and saw her. Something in the way she was sitting stopped him. Not the fact that she was on the floor, though that was unusual enough in a station where everyone moved with purpose. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that came not from rest but from someone who had just had something taken from them and had not yet decided what to do next. He had seen that before. Not in aliens. In people he had served with. In people who had just come back from something that did not go the way they had hoped and needed a minute before the world started moving again. He sat down. That was all. He was not trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be a decent person in a corridor. She told him what happened. Not all at once. She started slowly, like she was testing whether he was actually listening or just waiting for her to stop talking. He listened. He kept his eyes forward and let her speak without filling in her pauses or rushing her along. She told him about the petition. About the 8 months of preparation. About the chamber and the council and Dorvan and the badge she had placed in the official's hand. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment. Then he asked her one question. He asked if she still wanted to serve. She looked at him. The question was so simple that it caught her off guard. Most people, when they heard a story like hers, either offered sympathy or explained why things were the way they were. This human had done neither. He had asked her the only question that actually mattered. She said yes. He nodded. He said that was all he needed to hear. She did not understand what he meant by that. He did not explain. He stood up after a moment and told her his name and said she could find him through the human liaison office if she needed anything. Then he walked away down the corridor, unhurried, as if the whole conversation had been the most ordinary thing in the world. She sat there for a while after he left. Something had shifted, though she could not quite say what. Derek went back to his quarters that evening and sat at his small desk and opened the station's formal protocol database. He was not a diplomat. He was a soldier. But he had learned over the years that paperwork and process were sometimes the most powerful weapons available, especially in places run by councils and committees. He read through the Human Military Liaison Office's options for formal requests regarding non-human personnel evaluation opportunities. It took him 2 hours to find the right pathway, and another hour to write the request in language that could not be easily dismissed on procedural grounds. The request was simple. It asked that Zyra be considered for an evaluation trial conducted under joint observation, with the human military contingent serving as co-observers. It cited the documented completion of all listed prerequisites. It did not attack the Council's decision. It simply asked for a second look through a different window. He submitted it before he went to sleep. The next morning, Ambassador Claire Sutton summoned him to her office. Claire Sutton was a compact woman in her 50s with short silver hair and the kind of eyes that made it clear she had sat across from difficult people many times and was not easily moved by them. She was not angry with Derek, but she was not relaxed either. She had a copy of his request on the screen beside her desk. She asked him what he thought he was doing. He told her what he had seen and what Zyra had told him. He kept it factual. He did not editorialize. Claire listened without interrupting, which he took as a good sign. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had been in the gallery during the session. She had seen the way the council handled it. She had already spoken to a Velhari council aide afterward and been dismissed with a polite phrase that meant nothing and was designed to mean nothing. She looked at the request again. She said it was a long shot. He said he knew that. She said the Velhari Council was going to see it as an insult to their authority. He said they probably would. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said she was not going to block the request. She was also going to open her own diplomatic pressure channel quietly on the side, working through 2 non-Velhari delegates she trusted who had also been present in the gallery. She said she was not promising anything. She said these things usually went nowhere. He thanked her. She waved it off and told him to get back to his rotation. 2 days passed. On the morning of the 3rd day, Derek received a response from the Velhari Council liaison. The response was cold and precisely worded. It said that the human military's request was being reviewed as a matter of interspecies courtesy, but that the Council wished to make clear that internal Velhari personnel decisions were not subject to external review. It said a formal reply would be provided within 5 standard days. He read it twice. He noted that it had not said no. He went back to his corridor sweeps. Zyra found out about the request from a Velhari station clerk who had processed the paperwork and mentioned it to a colleague who mentioned it to someone who worked in the same maintenance section as a contact of Zyra's. The station was large, but information moved through it the way water moved through cracks. It always found a way. She stood in the corridor outside the Human Liaison Office for a long time before she went in and asked to leave a message for Sergeant Cole. The clerk took the message. It was short. It said she did not ask him to do this. It said she was not sure how she felt about it. It said she was not going to tell him to stop. Derek read the message that evening and decided that was about as close to permission as he was likely to get. On the 5th day, the formal response arrived. The Velhari Council had agreed to one option. Zyra would be permitted to undergo the Gauntlet of Standing, the traditional trial used for elite fleet evaluation candidates. It would be open to observers. The results would be binding. Claire Sutton came to find Derek when she heard. She told him to be careful. She said the gauntlet was not designed to be fair to someone like Zyra. She said the council had agreed because they were confident she would fail. Derek said he understood. He did not say what he had already started doing that evening, which was researching every recorded instance of the Gauntlet of Standing in the public station archives going back 40 years. He had a feeling the council was right that they were confident. He also had a feeling they had not thought very carefully about what a patient man with access to 40 years of records could do with 5 days of preparation. The Gauntlet of Standing was held in the lower arena level of the station, a wide circular floor surrounded by tiered observation platforms that could hold several hundred spectators. The ceiling was high and the lighting was bright, and there was nowhere to hide from the eyes of everyone watching. That was the point. The trial was not just a physical test. It was a performance. A display. The candidate was meant to be seen in every moment, under every condition, so that the council and the observers could form a complete judgment. Zyra arrived early. She wore the plain gray evaluation suit that had been provided for her, standard issue, no markings, nothing to identify her by rank or family. Just the suit and her own body and whatever she had built inside herself over the years. She stood at the entry threshold and looked at the arena floor and breathed. Derek was on the observer platform above. He had gotten there 30 minutes before the doors opened, which meant he had one of the front positions along the railing. He could see the full floor clearly. He had a small recording device clipped to the inside collar of his uniform, approved for use by all official observers, which the Velhari Council had made open to all registered delegates. He had registered as an observer through the Human Liaison Office the same day the trial date was confirmed. He had also spent the previous 4 evenings reading every public record he could find on the gauntlet, every documented account, every outcome report. He had found things that bothered him. He had written them down. He had kept writing. The trial began. The first segment was endurance movement. Zyra had to cross the arena floor repeatedly while the surface shifted beneath her, panels rising and falling in unpredictable patterns. It was designed to test physical balance, reaction time, and sustained focus. She moved through it steadily. She was not the fastest candidate anyone had ever seen, but she was consistent. She did not fall. She read the floor patterns with her eyes and adjusted her steps and kept going. By the time the first segment ended, she had completed more crossings than the minimum threshold. There was no applause from the Velhari section of the gallery. A few of the non-Velhari observers nodded to each other quietly. The second segment was cognitive. A series of tactical problems projected on a screen at the center of the floor, each one requiring a decision under time pressure. Zyra stood in front of the screen and worked through them one at a time. Derek watched her from above. She moved her hands in small precise gestures as she thought, a habit she probably did not know she had. She got through 9 of the 12 problems before time ran out. The passing threshold was 8. Still nothing from the Velhari gallery. Dorvant sat at the council observation bench on the far side of the platform, his expression unchanged, watching with the patience of someone who was waiting for a specific thing to happen. The third segment began. This was the one Derek had read about most carefully. It was listed in the official documentation as a sensory and focus evaluation. What it actually involved was the deployment of a high-frequency sound emitter built into the arena floor, which produced a sound in a range that affected certain species much more severely than others. The official records listed it as a mild disorienting stimulus. What Derek had found in medical observation reports attached to older gauntlet outcomes, buried in appendix files that most people would not think to look for, was a different story. The frequency used had been calibrated upward twice in the last 15 years. At its current setting, it was well above what any neutral medical standard would call mild. For species with a particular auditory profile, which included the outer world genetics that made up half of Zyra's bloodline, the effect was not disorientation. It was physical pain. The emitter activated. Zyra kept walking for about 20 seconds. Then her pace slowed. Then she stopped. Her hands went to the sides of her head. She did not make a sound, but her body said everything. She was fighting it. She kept fighting it. She took 2 more steps and then her knees went and she was on the floor, one hand pressed flat against the panels, head down, holding herself up by will alone. From the Velhari gallery there was laughter. Not all of them. But enough. Scattered sounds that echoed off the high ceiling and made the arena feel smaller and meaner than it was. Derek was already moving. He did not run. He walked with purpose along the observer platform toward the access ramp that led down to the arena floor level. A Velhari station official stepped into his path and told him that observers were not permitted on the floor during an active trial segment. Derek looked at him and said he was aware of that. He also said that the trial was using a frequency emitter calibrated outside the range defined in the official gauntlet documentation, and that if the official wanted to make a point of stopping him, he was welcome to do that on the record in front of everyone currently watching. The official stepped aside. Derek walked down to the arena floor. His footsteps were steady and even across the panel surface, and the sound from the emitter hit him too, a low pressure in his ears that was unpleasant but not incapacitating for his auditory range. He crossed the floor to where Zyra was and crouched down beside her. She looked up at him. Her eyes were pained, but they were still sharp. She was still in there. She had not gone anywhere. He spoke quietly enough that only she could hear him. He told her the whole room was watching. He told her they were watching because they wanted to see her stay down. He said she had gotten further than they ever intended to let her get, and that they had cheated to stop her, and that if she stood up right now and finished this, every observer on that platform who was not Velhari was going to remember exactly what they saw today. He said she did not have to get up for them. He said she should get up for herself. She looked at him for a moment. The sound was still going. He could see what it was doing to her, and it made something cold move through him. But he waited. He gave her the moment. She put her hand on his arm and used it to push herself upright. He steadied her once, briefly, and then she let go and stood on her own. She turned back toward the course markers and started walking again. Slowly at first. Then with more steadiness. The sound kept going. She kept going too. The Velhari gallery had gone quiet. She finished the segment. She crossed the final marker and the emitter cut off, and she stood in the center of the arena floor breathing hard, sweat along her jaw, her hands at her sides. She did not look at the council bench. She looked straight forward. Derek walked back to the observer ramp. He climbed it slowly. He sat back down in his position at the railing and picked up his documentation pad and wrote down the time the emitter had activated, the visible effect on the candidate, the calibration level as posted in the official trial specification versus what he had found in the archived medical reports, and the names of every Velhari gallery member he had seen laughing. He wrote it all down very carefully. Above him, Claire Sutton had already pulled out her own documentation device and was doing the same. The emergency council session was called the morning after the gauntlet. The notice went out to all registered station delegates before the first meal period. High Elder Dorvan had requested a full assembly hearing, and the language in the notice was formal and sharp. It described the behavior of a human military personnel member during the Gauntlet of Standing as an interference with sacred Velhari evaluation tradition. It requested that the assembly authorize a formal censure of Sergeant Derek Cole and that the human military contingent issue a written acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Derek received a copy of the notice along with everyone else. He read it once. He set it down. He went back to the files on his desk. He had not slept much. He had spent most of the night pulling documents. The station's public archive system was thorough, which was both its greatest strength and, it turned out, the council's greatest problem. Everything filed officially became part of the record. Medical reports from Gauntlet outcomes going back decades. Calibration logs for arena equipment. Procedural review filings, most of which had been quietly closed without findings. Injury reports listing candidates by species classification. Outcome records showing pass rates broken down by bloodline category. He printed everything. He organized it into a single ordered set. He put it in a plain carry case and went to find Ambassador Claire Sutton. She was already dressed when he arrived. She had the same notice on her screen, and she was on a channel with one of the non-Velhari delegates she trusted, a senior representative from the Marin Cooperative who had been in the observer gallery the previous day. Claire looked at Derek when he came in and looked at the carry case and told the person on the channel she would speak with them again in 1 hour. She asked Derek what was in the case. He set it on her desk and opened it and walked her through everything piece by piece. He was calm about it. He did not editorialize. He showed her the official calibration specification from the current Gauntlet documentation and then showed her the archived equipment log that showed the emitter had been adjusted upward twice since that specification was last updated. He showed her the medical reports from prior trials. He showed her the outcome records. He showed her 12 names. 12 candidates over the past 30 years who shared the same outer world auditory profile as Zyra, all of whom had failed the third segment of the Gauntlet, most of whom had reported post-trial medical symptoms consistent with acute frequency exposure, none of whom had ever received any official finding that anything irregular had occurred. Claire sat very still while he talked. She was a woman who had spent decades in rooms where people said things with great confidence that were not true, and she had developed a particular kind of stillness in response to information that confirmed what she had already suspected. She sat that way now. When he finished, she asked if all of this was from the public archive. He said yes. She asked if he had taken anything, altered anything, or accessed any restricted system. He said no. She looked at the stack of documents for a long moment. Then she said that in 30 years of diplomatic work she had occasionally been surprised by the scope of a problem when someone took the time to put everything in one place. She said most people did not take that time. She said she was glad he had. He said he had a habit of writing things down. She smiled briefly. Then she started making calls. The full assembly convened at midday. The chamber was fuller than it had been for Zyra's petition. Word had moved through the station the way it always did, quickly and in all directions, and every delegate who had heard any version of what happened at the gauntlet wanted to be present for whatever came next. Dorvan opened the session with a prepared statement. He stood at the council podium and spoke with the steady authority of a man who had held his position for a long time and believed that position would protect him the way it always had. He described the gauntlet of standing as a pillar of Velhari culture. He described Derek's entry onto the arena floor as a deliberate violation of that tradition, an act of disrespect dressed up as concern. He said the human military contingent needed to answer for the conduct of its personnel and that the assembly should make clear that internal Velhari processes were beyond the reach of outside interference. When he finished, there was a brief silence. Then Derek walked to the floor. He was in full uniform. He carried the plain case. He set it on the record table at the center of the chamber, the table where all formal evidence was placed during assembly proceedings, and he opened it and began placing documents on the surface one at a time. He did not hurry. He did not perform. He spoke in a clear, even voice. He said that where he came from, when someone had a concern about a process, the first thing they did was look at the record. He said he had looked at the record. He said he would like to share what the record contained. He went through it point by point. The calibration discrepancy between the official gauntlet specification and the actual equipment setting. The archived medical reports. The 12 names and their outcomes. The dates, the species classifications, the injury notations, the closed procedural reviews. He laid each document on the table as he mentioned it, building a physical stack that everyone in the chamber could see growing. He did not raise his voice once. He said at the end that he had not entered the arena floor to disrespect the gauntlet. He said he had entered because a candidate was being harmed by equipment operating outside its stated parameters, and that standing on a platform watching that happen without acting was not something he was able to do. He said his species had a habit of writing things down. He said he had written all of this down very carefully, and that every document on that table was a matter of official station record, and that he was prepared to make the full set available to any delegate who wanted it. He stepped back from the table. The chamber was quiet. Then the delegate screens started lighting up. Non-Velhari representatives pulling the documents onto their own systems. Reading. Comparing. The Marin cooperative delegate leaned over to a colleague and said something quietly. A cluster of 3 outer compact representatives were already in a side conversation, their heads together, their expressions serious. Dorvan started to speak. He said the documents were being taken out of context. He said the medical reports in question had been reviewed at the time and no findings had been issued. He said the human soldier was not qualified to interpret Velhari technical calibration standards. A delegate from the Sorin Assembly raised a formal point of order and asked why a candidate with the same auditory profile as 12 prior candidates who had all failed the same segment had been approved for a trial using that equipment configuration without any medical adjustment or disclosed risk notice. Dorvan did not answer that. Claire Sutton formally submitted a request for a conduct review of Gauntlet administration practices over the past 30 years. It was on the record table before Dorvan could respond. 3 delegations co-signed within the hour. 2 more added their endorsement before the session closed. The Velhari Council bench had stopped looking at the assembly floor. Several of the council members were in quiet conversation with each other, the kind that was clearly about damage and not about principle. The fracture was visible. The traditionalist block around Dorvan sat rigid and silent. 2 younger council members on the end of the bench had leaned away from the rest. Derek picked up his carry case from the table. Most of the documents were still there, formally entered into the record now, belonging to the assembly and not to him. He walked toward the chamber exit. He did not look at Dorvan. He did not need to. The conduct review took 11 days. The assembly appointed a neutral panel made up of 3 non-Velhari delegates and 2 independent station mediators. They went through every document Derek had placed on the record table and then they asked for more. The station archive system was open to the panel without restriction. What they found matched what Derek had shown the assembly and then went further. There were calibration records that had never been part of any public filing. There were internal council communications discussing candidate outcomes in language that left very little room for generous interpretation. There were approval signatures on equipment adjustments that traced directly back to decisions made at the council level. Dorvan submitted a formal rebuttal on the 4th day. By the 7th day it was clear that the rebuttal was not going to be enough. By the 9th day 2 of the council members on the end of the bench had already made quiet contact with the panel through their personal staff, which meant they were distancing themselves before the findings came down. The findings came on the 11th day. The panel issued a full written determination. It found that the gauntlet of standing had been administered with equipment operating outside its stated parameters for at least 19 years. It found that the outcomes for candidates with certain auditory profiles had been structurally disadvantaged in a way that was not disclosed and not accidental. It found no evidence that any single candidate who had failed the third segment under those conditions should be considered to have failed on fair grounds. Dorvan was removed from his position pending a formal review of his full tenure. 2 other council members were placed under inquiry. The traditional council structure was suspended temporarily while the Velhari internal governance process worked through what to do next. None of it happened loudly. There were no dramatic confrontations. No speeches in the chamber. The institution that had humiliated Zyra in front of hundreds of observers was being taken apart through its own records, by its own process, because someone had taken the time to look carefully and write everything down. Zyra received the formal notification 3 days after the panel findings were issued. It came through official channels, on station letterhead, signed by the acting assembly coordinator. It stated that in light of the conduct review findings, her petition for fleet evaluation had been granted. She was awarded provisional standing in the Galactic Defense Fleet and assigned as official liaison to the human military contingent aboard the station, pending full evaluation scheduling. She was the first half-blood in recorded Velhari history to hold any official fleet standing. She sat in her quarters and read the notification 3 times. The words did not become more real with repeated reading. They stayed exactly the same size on the page, plain and formal and impossible. She had spent so long believing that the door was closed that she had stopped trying to picture what might be on the other side of it. Now it was open and she was not entirely sure how to walk through it yet. But she folded the notification carefully and put it in her jacket pocket, close to her chest, and she stood up. She went to find Derek. She knew where he usually was at this hour of the day. She had learned his patterns the way you learn the patterns of someone who has become a fixed point in your life without your quite noticing when that happened. She found him in the corridor near the outer east wing, the same section where she had first sat against the wall and he had sat down beside her without being asked. He was leaning against the wall doing a final check of a corridor access log on his handheld device, relaxed, unhurried, the same way he did everything. He looked up when he heard her coming and waited. She stopped a few feet from him. She did not know exactly what she had planned to say. She had been turning words over in her mind the whole walk here and none of them had settled into the right shape. She told him she had received the notification. He said he had heard. He said it quietly, without celebration, which she appreciated. He was not the kind of person who performed feelings he did not have, and the feeling he had right now seemed to be something steady and private, the way someone looks when something they work for finally comes through and they are simply glad rather than loud about it. She told him she had not asked him to do any of it. She said she wanted to make sure he knew that. He said he knew that. She asked him why he had done it anyway. She had thought about this question for 11 days and she still did not have the answer. She needed to hear it from him. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking up an answer but the quiet of someone deciding how much of an honest answer to give. Then he said that when he turned that corner and saw her sitting on the floor, he had not seen an alien species or a petition case or a political situation. He had seen someone who had just had something taken from them that they had earned, and everyone who could have said something had looked away. He said that where he came from, looking away from that was an option that did not sit right afterward. Not for him. He said some people could do it without it weighing on them. He said he was not built that way. She looked at him for a long time. She asked if all humans were like that. He thought about it. He said enough of them were. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the notification. She looked at it again in the corridor light. The words were still the same. They were still impossible and real at the same time. She folded it back along its crease and returned it to her pocket. She looked at Derek and said she was going to be a very good liaison. He said he had no doubt about that. She said she was also going to be a very good fleet officer. He said he knew that too. She nodded once. There was nothing more to say that the words could carry without making it smaller than it was. She turned and started walking toward the docking bay corridor, toward the direction of the fleet section, toward the door that was open now and waiting. After a moment she heard his footsteps fall in beside her. They walked together down the long pale corridor, neither one speaking, both of them heading somewhere new. The light above them was cold and white and steady, and it fell on them both the same way, without distinction, the way light tends to do when it has no reason to make a difference between one person and another. She had been cast aside in a room full of people who did not think she was worth the trouble of defending. She had been told by the shape of every system around her that she did not belong, that her blood was wrong, that her existence was a complication they could not be asked to accommodate. And then one person had sat down on the floor beside her and asked if she still wanted to serve. She was still walking. That was the answer.